Thanks to the actions we have taken in the recent years, Europe is now far less exposed to fossil fuels imports. Our diversification efforts are paying off, but this does not mean that we are immune to price shocks. Energy markets are global. Disruptions in the Gulf quickly affect prices everywhere. We are already seeing price spikes, and this is why the G7 energy ministers met yesterday, to be followed by a video call by G7 leaders. But no matter what we do in terms of measures, as long as we import a significant share of fossil fuels from unstable regions, we are vulnerable and we are dependent. And this energy always comes at a cost. I want to give you just an example. Since the beginning of this conflict, gas prices have risen by 50% and oil prices have risen by 27%. If you translate this in euros, the 10 days of war have already cost European taxpayers an additional 3 billion euros in fossil fuel imports, additional. That is the price of our dependence. And, honourable members, fact is, we have energy sources that are homegrown, renewables and nuclear. Their prices have remained the same over the last 10 days. Yet in current crisis, some argue that we should abandon our long-term strategy and even go back to Russian fossil fuels. This would be a strategic blunder. It would make us more dependent, more vulnerable and weaker. So we should stay the course of our long-term strategy. We can be more pragmatic, we can be smart in its implementation, no question, but the direction of travel is the right one. Now, where do we stand today? Households and companies face pressure now, so we must deliver relief now. And we must comprehensively look at how we can reduce people's energy bills, not only looking at one component, but rather at all 4 components of the price. That is, the cost of the energy itself, which makes more or less 56% on average of the bill, grid charges on average 18%, taxes and levies 15%, and carbon costs on average around 11%. As I said, of course, these are averages and they differ depending on the energy mix in the respective member state. Now, on the cost of energy, on the market design. Overall, the current market design has delivered, and there is overall support for the current system. But it is crucial that we reduce the cost impact when gas sets the electricity price. Therefore, we are preparing different options, better use of power purchase agreements and contracts for difference, state aid measures, and we are exploring subsidizing or even capping the gas price. Second, on the grid charges. That is a delicate matter because on one hand, these charges are needed to invest in more and smarter grids, and on the other hand, there is room to increase the productivity of grids so that less renewables are wasted. And here I want to give you one figure that is telling. Last year, we installed more than 80 gigawatts of renewables in the European Union, a record. So far, so good. But 6 times more renewable energy does not get access to the grids. So if we produced 6 times more renewables, that was wasted. With electricity demand set to increase, this is simply not sustainable. My third point on taxes and levy, this is of course a national competence. I fully respect that. But it is also true that some member states are taxing electricity much higher even than gas. To give you another example, one member state applies 0% taxes, zero, on retail electricity, while some others apply over 16%. That makes a difference. So there is room for action, and as I said, it is a national competence. Finally, the fourth component on ETS. Also on ETS, let me give you one figure. Without ETS, we would now consume 100 billion cubic meter more gas, again making us more vulnerable, more dependent and weaker. So we need ETS, but we need to modernize it. And I look forward to continuing this debate on all these elements with you here in the European Parliament. Honourable members, let me finish on another aspect of competitiveness. It is one thing that we actually agree on components of competitiveness, that's good, but it's another thing that we deliver on the action and the legislation. And this is why we will soon present a roadmap for One Europe, One Market. The purpose of this roadmap is that we set out key legislative measures that we must adopt with clear timelines, clear targets, to deliver them by the end of 2027. We want to be done and completed with the work by the end of 2027 for One Europe, One Market. And I say that explicitly because we all know by experience only what gets measured gets done. So the roadmap contains various packages of legislation. It's also very important. Savings and investment union, all the topics of energy I was just touching upon, quality jobs, AI, gigafactories, the 28th regime. You just name it, these are only a few. My point is that I would like all three institutions, Parliament, Council and Commission, to sign up for it. We know the challenges. We know what must be done. Now we must deliver for European citizens. Thank you, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much. Now we go to the speakers for the political groups, starting with the EPP group, Jeroen Lenners.
Thank you, Madam President, dear Commission President, dear Deputy Minister. Iran's crisis did not begin on the 28th of February. It began much earlier, when this cruel and oppressive regime chose to wage war on its own people, when young protesters were shot in the streets, where women demanding freedom were beaten. So yes, we stand with the Iranian people. For years, the international community hoped that diplomacy would do the trick, and Europe tried diplomacy. We signed the nuclear deal, yet the regime continued building missile capabilities for reaching Athens, Bucharest and Sofia. We imposed sanctions, but Iran continued sponsoring terrorism, destabilizing the Middle East. The nuclear threat remains, and Iran delivers the weapons that Russia uses to attack Ukraine. So let's be honest, and I repeat this, the world is better off without this regime. And for the first time in decades, there might be a real possibility for change. But it's also risky. Military intervention without clear objectives or an exit strategy has the danger of instability, humanitarian suffering and regional escalation. And it's of paramount importance that this conflict does not turn into a full-blown regional war. And we call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint, to protect civilians and to fully respect international law. But this crisis also tells us something about Europe. Iranian drones reached Cyprus. That means this conflict, as the Deputy Minister said, is no longer distant. It has already touched on European soil. And when Europe's security is at stake, Europe must act together. At this time, Cyprus did not invoke Article 40T, paragraph 7. But imagine if a member state does. Solidarity cannot be improvised in the middle of a crisis. If a member state is attacked, Europe needs to know how it responds. We have the nuclear umbrella that France provides and that strengthens our European deterrence. But we must also build common capabilities, drones, cyber brigade, missile shield, and ultimately a true European defence union. But strength also does not come only from capabilities. Security also means speaking with one voice. Europe was not consulted on Ukraine's peace talks. We were not there on Venezuela and not on Iran. Why? Because a Europe with 27 different voices is not taken seriously. When Prime Minister Sanchez weakens NATO, or when Viktor Orban breaks our common line on Ukraine, we show Washington and Beijing a simple message. When Europe is divided, Europe can be ignored. And the next European Council must begin building real European security, starting with the 90 billion we promised for Ukraine's defence. Europe's security cannot become a tool in someone's domestic election campaign. Viktor Orban is failing Hungarian citizens on healthcare, on education, on the economy, and now he's trying to distract from those failures with a disinformation campaign that undermines Europe's unity and our security. Enough is enough. And, dear colleagues, strength also means economic strength. In a world in turmoil, only a competitive Europe can secure our prosperity. That is what the EPP campaigned on, and that is what we are delivering. We are simplifying rules, cutting red tape, strengthening trade partnerships and deepening the single market. And this has already saved European companies billions of euros. But the work is not finished. We must go further and we must go faster. And the consequences of the war in Iran are already visible in our member states. Energy prices are rising again, putting pressure on households and businesses across the European Union. And if geopolitical tensions drive up energy costs for Europeans, the European Council cannot stay silent. We expect clear discussions and concrete action. Our citizens expect leadership. They will not accept politics that merely describe the chaos. They want us to fix it. As De Gasperi once said, politics is about making things happen, whether in good weather or bad. And today we are facing difficult weather. And when some in European politics choose procedural nitpicking and institutional turf wars, we choose leadership. Not hesitation, not excuses, leadership. To build a Europe that protects its people and protects our prosperity. Let's deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lenas. Now the chair of the S&D Group, Irache García Pérez.
Gracias, presidenta. No a la guerra, sí al derecho internacional. Este es el sentir de una gran parte de la ciudadanía europea. Y usted, señora von der Leyen, ha afirmado que Europa ya no puede ser guardiana del viejo orden mundial. Pero el problema no es si el orden mundial es viejo o nuevo. El problema es quien permite que se viole. Y cuando Europa responde con complacencia y apaciguamiento, lo que se está haciendo es abrir la puerta a que autócratas como Trump o Netanyahu lo pisoteen sin consecuencias. Su responsabilidad no es declarar obsoleto el orden internacional. Su responsabilidad es defenderlo, es exigir el cumplimiento de las normas y plantar cara a los autócratas con hechos. Se planta cara activando el instrumento de anticoerción cada vez que un gobierno amenaza a la Unión Europea con aranceles. Se planta cara imponiendo sanciones cuando un gobierno comete un genocidio. Y se planta cara defendiendo el Pacto Verde, no desmontándolo, para que las energías renovables nos liberen del gas y del petróleo de los tiranos más crueles. Señora von der Leyen, usted justificó el ataque contra Irán diciendo que no se debe llorar el régimen iraní. Tiene razón en una cosa. Ningún demócrata llora por la dictadura de los ayatolás. Un régimen que ha reprimido brutalmente a su pueblo, especialmente a las mujeres, y que ha desestabilizado toda la región. Por eso hemos apoyado sanciones contra ese régimen y queremos más sanciones hasta asfixiar a la dictadura. Pero una cosa es no llorar por el régimen y otra, muy distinta, es guardar silencio ante la muerte de inocentes. Porque muchos de nosotros sí lloramos por las más de 150 niñas asesinadas en una escuela en Minaj por los bombardeos estadounidenses. Lloramos por los más de 500 civiles muertos en Líbano bajo los ataques israelíes. Y lloramos porque todas las vidas valen lo mismo. Y precisamente por eso debemos decir lo evidente. Debemos decir lo evidente, el ataque militar de Estados Unidos e Israel contra Irán viola la Carta de las Naciones Unidas. Si aceptamos que las grandes potencias pueden bombardear cuando quieran, entonces el derecho internacional deja de existir y volvemos a la ley de la jungla. Además, esta guerra ya está golpeando a nuestras empresas y trabajadores. El precio del petróleo y del gas vuelven a dispararse y resulta intolerable mirar hacia otro lado. Existe también un riesgo real de una crisis migratoria de enorme magnitud. En definitiva, Trump organiza la fiesta y los ciudadanos europeos pagamos la factura. Permítame dirigirme también a usted, señor Manfred Weber. Han apelado a la unidad de la Unión Europea en política exterior. Y estoy completamente de acuerdo con usted. Pero esa unidad hay que practicarla. Y se empieza pidiendo lo fundamental, que es condenar la violación de la Carta de las Naciones Unidas y exigir el respeto al derecho internacional. Y también estoy de acuerdo con apelar a esa unidad, como ha hecho la representante del Consejo, mostrando solidaridad cuando un país de la Unión Europea es atacado. Y usted tuvo la oportunidad de ponerse del lado de España cuando en la conferencia de presidentes presentamos un debate para hablar de esto. Pudo ponerse del lado de España y se puso del lado de la extrema derecha, votando en contra de